give you Lieutenant Colonel John Krenson, our man.
Thank you very much. I've got my watch. You guys remember to take it off and set it down where I can see it. May thank you later. Thank you, Dan, very much for that introduction. Words like that make my mother proud. I appreciate it. I keep meaning to bring her to things like this. She would be in a hog head, no doubt. Before I forget, too, I want to thank, I don't think I see many of them in here. I want to thank the servers and the staff from the hotel here who really help these events come together and do the things behind the scenes that we don't always notice that make these events great. Let's give applause to the staff. There are several people that I'd like to thank and recognize, and the first, of course, is Dan. Dan has become a dear friend to me over the past decade, and I really appreciate it, take it as an honor as inviting me to speak here to all of you today. Also want to recognize Dr. David Black. I know he's not here today, he's from the Hendersonville Club, and I recognize the folks here among them. Dr. Black is a great Rotarian from the Hendersonville Club, and he was a big part of that bringing our soldiers home for the holidays. We had known each other prior to that, and he didn't know that I was with the 278, and I didn't know he was part of the Rotary effort until I saw his name on a list of club members who were helping us with that, and we had reestablished a relationship we had back in the 90s, and I see him 2 or 3 times a year. Just a great man, and I appreciate his support and what he does for us. Also, I would like to recognize Ambassador Dick Bowers, who I've just gotten to know just a little bit over the last few months through Dan, but the reason I mention him is that he has served in uniform, he has served in the diplomatic ranks, he's been prepared to defend peace, and he has worked tirelessly his whole career for peace as a Foreign Service officer, but then also now as a Rotarian. And he really represents a great deal of what I'm going to talk about today. So I wanted to make special mention of that. I'd also like to thank all the folks that back in 2009, as Dan mentioned, contributed to bringing our soldiers home. The Army was really good about giving us leave for Christmas, but they forgot that we were about 6 or 7 hours away from our homes, and not everybody could make that trip. And so thanks to the Rotarians, every single soldier was able to get home. And I can tell you, I saw a couple of tears among some pretty hardened guys when they found out that they were going to be able to make it home and how we were getting home. So thank you all for that. One of those soldiers, too, I want to mention, was then a captain, a not so young captain, but Captain Tim Molyneux, whose wife Phyllis is here in the audience. And Tim served as my JAG officer, Judge Advocate, who was my attorney, while we were deployed in Iraq. And we spent a lot of time, unfortunately, together. When the commander spent a lot of time with his JAG, you know, for being distracted from our core mission, but thank God he was there. No telling how many times he probably saved me from doing the wrong thing. Maybe I wanted to do, but couldn't do. So, Phil, thank you again. I can never thank you enough. And also, I'd like to ask vets that are here and family members, either serving soldiers or veterans, to please stand up. Anybody who has served or has family members, to please stand up. I want to thank you. Those of us who serve today get thanked an awful lot, and I have today, and I really do appreciate that. We have big shoes to fill for folks who have come before us, so I think it's important to recognize them, and the family members as well. Sometimes I say, I believe it's tougher on them than it is on us, and so I have to thank my own family, even though they're not here today, because they have certainly sacrificed a great deal, and many a sleepless night not knowing what's going on. But at least when we're over there, we understand what we're doing and what's going on around us. The people at home live in a vacuum sometimes, and it's very tough. I know that Rotary has a dual focus, whether it's Bob Dietrich's Operation Starfish, providing safe water to low-income residents here in local Tennessee, or Jim Johnston's World Community Service Project in Honduras. And I expect that both of those gentlemen are here. If they are, I'd like to ask them to stand up. Their efforts are great examples of the tremendous contributions to peace in our world. So again, this dual focus of local and international service. My own life has had a similar dual focus, and it began in a harrowing way at the age of 5, when with my family we were serving, although at 5 I wasn't serving much, but with my family we were in Appalachia in the coal mine areas up there. And I recall that we were in the town of Beauty, Kentucky. Some of you may have heard of it if you're maybe from the eastern Kentucky area. We were traveling in an old VW bus, picking up supplies at the local grocery fair. My dad was taking a picture of the sign reading, "Welcome to Beauty," when some locals became upset because behind the sign were piles of trash, salvage, torn up old tires. They thought my dad was mocking them because what was behind there did not exactly reinforce the town's name of Beauty, Kentucky. They saw him, they brandished some firearms, and encouraged him to beat it. So we loaded up in the VW bus. We're driving through the coal mine roads. It was hot, it was dusty, no air conditioning, and then we heard bam, 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 and it sounded close. So my dad put the pedal to the metal, did some excellent, actually Army-type training, evasive driving techniques, got us further down the road, and then we heard it again, bam, bam, bam. Nobody was behind us. And finally, someone in the van realized the sound was coming from inside the bus. It was the heat, popping the bottle caps off the beer. Now that was my first, though not my last time under fire on dusty roads in the middle of nowhere. But I'll take being shot at by beer anytime. Today we're here to talk about peace and how to serve peace. But to do that, we need to start with our notions of peace. Simply put, what is it? What is peace? Is peace merely, as many put it, the absence of war? And is that enough, if that is what it is? Or is it, as my own religious tradition describes it, quote, not merely an absence of war, but is the tranquility of order, is the work of justice and the effect of charity? That peace includes conditions such as security of private property, free communication, respect for others, liberty, self-determination. Perhaps it comes down to this. Is peace coexistence, or is it cooperation? Or is it both, where one is achievable, but the other is not? Peaceful coexistence was a popular notion, especially in the Cold War, and was advanced by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Some say disingenuously so, others say he promoted it for survival. The idea of coexistence is a popular one. Live and let live. I know I often see coexist stickers on vehicle bumpers, spelled out in religious symbols from around the world. Perhaps some of you have such stickers on your own cars. But I know that I am not satisfied with coexistence. I want a world of cooperation. Cooperation engenders and entails understanding, which leads to building relationships which we then cannot afford to break. And that is what helps to ensure genuine and lasting peace. So then what is a guy in an army uniform? The army were known for what? Jumping in and shoot them out and hopefully getting out of Dodge. So what am I doing here talking about peace and cooperation? Well, I've come to you with a unique perspective. As a citizen soldier in the National Guard, I'm wearing my uniform today because Dan asked me to, and our public affairs officer, most importantly, said that I could. And I'm always honored to put the uniform on. Plus, much of the talk I have today is based on my research project at the Army War College regarding the integration of the elements of national power. But my experience also goes beyond combat operations in defense of peace. It includes my first adult experience in international relations in a program that Dan mentioned and is unique to the National Guard, the State Partnership Program, which is part of a broader Partnership for Peace program, where National Guard states in the U.S. are paired up with foreign militaries to help them understand, among other things, civilian control of the military and how to develop an effective reserve system. Now, this program, this Partnership for Peace program, began in the early 90s following the Cold War as a bridge to peace between the militaries of former enemies. And it is still in existence and has since expanded to partnerships with developing countries across the globe in every continent. Tennessee is paired with Bulgaria. And during an exercise in 1996 as a young captain, I participated in part of our exchange there. And a couple things I'll never forget about that. One is sitting across new comrades, officers from the Bulgarian military, in their uniforms and we in our uniforms, and realizing that if it had been 2 or 3 years prior to that, we would have been looking at each other through a very different set of eyes, probably with the intent to kill one another. And a couple of those guys still had that look in their eyes. The other thing I remember, too, was visiting a children's daycare in a town of Belene, which is along the Danube River, which borders Bulgaria and Romania. Now, Belene is an important town. It's where the old communist government of Bulgaria sent its political prisoners. It was like the Gulag of Bulgaria, much like Siberia was for the former Soviet Union. On my team there, in addition to the exercise, we took some duffel bags of stuffed animals that were donated by churches in Tennessee to the children of Bulgaria. We took them to the daycare. And we found out while we were there that we were the first Americans that these people in this remote town, only recently freed from communism, had ever seen. And did they ever welcome us? And they toasted us with rakia, the local moonshine, and the daycare. And they toasted in typical, Eastern European style, one right after the other. It was a moving and a somewhat staggering experience. Probably the only time I've ever legally drank in uniform. That event was followed some 8 years later, in 2004, when I was deployed to Kabul, Afghanistan. And more than midway through the tour, I had the opportunity to visit an orphanage. In fact, it was very important to me to make this trip. Many of my soldiers had visited the orphanage before. This was our last opportunity to do so. I remember looking at the young girls there. Dan mentioned this. They were beautiful, beautiful girls with dirt on their faces, with their beauty shines right through that. Never forget them. I'll never forget, while looking at them, I was thinking of my own daughter, 3 years old at the time, who had herself been an orphan in Russia when we adopted her just 3 years before that. And the nexus of this event could not escape. Russia having been involved in Afghanistan, I having visited Russia as a teenager when they were in Afghanistan, being in Russia multiple times after that, eventually adopting my children there, and now my involvement in Afghanistan, where the Soviets had been visiting orphan children, much like my children had been orphans. And I remember asking some of the girls in that orphanage their plans for their future. And their answers that even came through vibrantly through their interpreters. Their answers: to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, and the one I'll never forget who was going to be, not wanted to be, was going to be president of Afghanistan someday. And I hope she still thinks that. But all of this, these dreams had been illegal and unobtainable before the United States came in and threw out the Taliban government and the Al-Qaeda camps. Not completely, but enough so that now these girls could receive an education and they could have dreams. The same kind of dreams that I had then and have now for my own daughter. And that she now, at 13 years of age, as a young teenager, that she has for herself. I'll never forget also in Kabul the 20-year-old entrepreneur that I'd come to know. And asked me early on in my tour there, eye to eye, how long the Americans were going to stay. Because, as he said, quote, they know who we are. Meaning he knew the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were watching and waiting for us to leave as unfortunately we've done at times previously in our history. His question really then was really whether Afghanistan would become like Germany and Japan, or whether Afghanistan would become like Vietnam. And he asked because after I went home, his life would continue to be at stake. Because they were watching him, not me. I'll never forget that night. It was a hard night to sleep. And it still is when I think about that conversation, and especially with 2014 moving ahead of us with the aggressive withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. I remember a more recent event in Iraq, in 2010 when I was there, commanding convoy security operations as part of the drawdown. I had been invited to speak to a local Sheikh's council to discuss the interaction between the local civilian drivers and our convoys sharing the same roads. Two things were seared in my mind that day. First, the eyes of these men who had themselves been prisoners and in cases tortured by Saddam Hussein's government. And many of them who had lost family members, sons and daughters to tortures into the prisons of Saddam Hussein. Secondly, the litany of examples that one of these Muslim sheikhs gave me of where America had assisted and helped Muslim nations throughout the world. He listed them, not one or two, a litany of times that the U.S. came to the aid of Muslim nations. And his desire that not only he and I would know of these examples, but that our peoples would know of and understand these examples. Now, these adults that were involved in these events, the teachers at the orphanages, the sheikhs that I mentioned, have a long memory of oppression. And they appreciate peace even as an absence of war. But they also know that absence of war is not a substitute for genuine and cooperative peace. You go to bed scared every night. Now, perhaps the young people, the entrepreneurs, the Bulgarian children at the daycare, the orphans of Kabul that we met, perhaps they were impacted by such positive interactions as ours, so as to be moved to be a generation of cooperators, starting with the understanding of one another that we sought in those personal face-to-face experiences. You see, I'm convinced that cooperation, while gradual and in some places distant, more than 30, 60, even 100 years from now, but I believe that that cooperation is possible, and that it is better than coexistence. But in the meantime, we must unfortunately face and deal with those who do not want even that, with those whose cars do not bear a coexisting bumper sticker. Characters such as in the past Hitler, Stalin, Khomeini, Arafat, Bin Laden, and many others who are not satisfied with coexistence, much less cooperation. There are those in history and still today who instead seek to oppress liberty, to oppress women, to oppress those who think, worship, or live differently, or even are physically different. These oppressors must often be deterred and sometimes confronted. And this peace is brought about by strength, and frankly brought about by those wearing this or similar uniforms. Peace through strength was a mantra popular in the 80s, and that some believe helped bring about the fall of communism and helped lead to the freedom of many countries, including the Bulgaria I have visited some half a dozen times now. You see, peace is a two-way street. Both parties must desire it. To coexist in the absence of war requires potential oppressors to be deterred by strength. For those who seek genuine peace through cooperation, it requires the development of understanding one another. And the world consists of both, those who would oppress and those who would cooperate. Therefore, our approach cannot rely primarily on either military strength, nor rely primarily on goodwill and aid. Our approach to the service of peace must be integrated. And I believe in both approaches. There must be those who serve in the military to either make war absent through deterrence, or to defend peace when threatened. And there must be those who serve peace diplomatically and through economic cooperation and the development of understanding to either prevent war in the first place or to build and restore peace when necessary. deter and confront where we must, and be resourced adequately to do so, to understand and cooperate where we can, and be prioritized and resourced to do so. My experience has been that people who understand and respect each other will not fight each other. That is the key, and that takes time to develop. But that has been achieved by people such as yourselves sitting here. Rotary International. It has been achieved by other organizations such as Sister Cities International, endorsed and promoted by the Eisenhower administration in the 50s to restore peace in Europe, and continues to do the same thing around the world today. It has been achieved by student exchange programs, such as the one that sent me to Finland for a year as a high school student and changed my life. Rotary Youth Exchange. We have a young man from Brazil. Right over here, please stand up. This is how we develop understanding. And coincidentally, we had an exchange student at the Army War College, an officer from Brazil, with 60 some odd other officers from foreign nations at the U.S. Army War College, developing relationships. This understanding is really and most effectively by what the State Department calls public diplomacy, by citizen diplomats. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates acknowledged that sustainable outcomes for peace require civilian development and economics and governance. It's people relating to people is the most effective tool for peace and cooperation. My research at the War College bears out that peace is achieved by 3 legs. Military strength, primarily to deter those who exploit weakness; effective diplomacy and coordinated government action for official relations between governments; and civilian private sector power to develop true understanding between people who essentially drive their governments to peace. This civilian power is best manifested by exchanges, trade, and especially by groups, the service of groups like Rotary International. This kind of effort has been effective in the past, particularly during the Cold War. And integration of these elements of power, diplomacy, information, military, and economics, have become a priority again in both the current and previous administrations, especially as developed by Secretary Gates and General Martin Dempsey, and Secretaries Rice and Secretary Clinton. The State Department has in fact adopted a planning cycle called the Quadrennial Diplomatic and Development Review, or the QDDR, modeled on the Quadrennial Defense Review. The initial QDDR in 2010 was entitled Leading Through Civilian Power, and it encourages public diplomacy through efforts such as the Global Partnership Initiative and the strategic dialogue with civil society, relying on the private sector. And it is likely that Secretary Kerry will continue these efforts, and indeed the second QDDR is well underway in development. There is also a joint planning group between the Department of Defense and the Department of State working to more effectively integrate military and public sector civilian power. That leaves the private sector. We all, as civilians, the citizen side of my citizen soldier, and you all, citizens of these seats, have a vocation to serve. Now, I believe the word vocation is simply another word for service. Some have a vocation in ministry, others in marriage. Others serve in healthcare, education, law enforcement. Some have vocations in the military, and still others as citizen diplomats through business exchange, student exchange, service projects, and many other public methods. Rotary is one such vocation of peace through service. Sometimes peace can be achieved only through strength. Sometimes it is strength that makes cooperation a rational alternative. Sometimes there is a genuine desire for cooperation. Whatever the case, it takes an integration of the elements of national power through public and private action to prevent war, or better yet, to achieve genuine, cooperative, lasting peace. It takes an integrated and a coordinated effort. we all bear a personal responsibility to serve peace. As your president of Rotary International, Sakuchi Tanaka, did I get Sakuchi right? Yes, you did. Believe me, with Krenson, you hear all kinds of screwy interpretations of a name. I want to do it to somebody else. But as he has stated, and I quote him here, Rotary helps us to meet the basic needs of others. It builds bridges of friendship and tolerance among people and nations. It helps us understand one another. We can bring peace closer through service. Peace is not something that can only be achieved through treaties by governments or through heroic struggles. It is something that we can find and that we can achieve every day and in many simple ways, end quote. And I would humbly add that it is in efforts such as these that peace can most effectively be achieved. Because people who understand and cooperate across borders on a personal level will not allow their governments to go to war. Therefore, for Rotarians, I know your vocation is as citizen diplomats, actively developing mutual understanding and seeking peace through service. So thank each and every one of you for the service that you do as Rotarians. And also, those of us in uniform get thanked a lot. In fact, I have today, and thank you for that. But I've begun a habit of when being thanked, especially by groups, is to thank you. Thank you for being Americans. Thank you for what you do at your workplace, at your school. Thank you for what you do with your families. Thank you for being worth serving for. Because why else do it? Why else do it? We do it because of what you represent. So thank you for that. And thank you for allowing me to be with you here today.